mechanical figures that perform acrobatics on their own, inexhaustible bottles, mind-reading acts, coin sleights, card sleights. These are just some of the tricks of the magician's trade, but they all bear the signature of one man. His career in magic lasted only 10 years, but Jean-Eugène Robert-Houdin is called the father of modern magic.
I think Robert-Houdin was the Doug Henning of his day.
From bullet catches, to coin sleights, to second sight, to automatons, all that you see here in whole or in part are illusions that originated with or were defined by a single magician. He was a true Renaissance man, and he has left an indelible mark on magic. He is Jean-Eugène Robert-Houdin.
He's known as the father of modern magic, and I think there can be no dispute on that point.
Robert-Houdin was, yes, very much responsible, certainly, for influencing a great number of people.
He moved us into a modern world. He's considered the father of modern conjuring when we lost the robes and the caps.
I think that the more we learn about Robert-Houdin, the more importance he takes on. He doesn't become less the more we learn, he becomes more.
I will be lighting myself on fire momentarily, folks. Here we go. Ready?
What busker Mike Marina is doing here on Santa Monica's promenade is what magicians have been doing since the beginning of time, namely, performing for a crowd outdoors. Until Robert-Houdin, this is where most magic was performed.
Before Houdin came along, magicians were basically street performers considered essentially like criminals. They were pickpockets and carny crooks, the kinds of people that most respectable individuals would not want to associate with.
In addition, the magicians of the day still dressed as Merlin, the conical cap, the flowing robes, the magic wand. They were far from respectable society, and Robert-Houdin was born into a very respectable world. Specifically, he was born Jean-Eugène Robert in Blois, France. It was December 7th, 1805.
He was a clockmaker, a mechanic, a very clever technical performer with machinery.
In 1830, Jean-Eugène Robert would meet and marry the daughter of a noted Parisian watchmaker. He would move to Paris and, unusually, adopt his wife's maiden name, becoming Jean-Eugène Robert-Houdin. Even at this early stage, Robert-Houdin had started to play with magic as a hobby, mastering sleights of hand using cards or coins. Soon he began to consider magic an art form, one he wished to pursue much more seriously. By the 1840s, Robert-Houdin had put watchmaking aside. He dedicated himself to magic, and from the very start, he did magic differently. For one thing, he opted for evening dress. He went even further than that, however.
Robert-Houdin sort of brought it into the drawing room, not quite on the street corner and such, and it was no longer a costume. It was a gentleman of means who could do some interesting experiments in psychology or whatever they called it in that day. So it was not a flamboyant character. It was a respectable, restrained, dignified gentleman doing the routines.
Utilizing the skills of a watchmaker, Robert-Houdin soon brought automatons into his act.
He always seemed to have an automata of one or another in his show.
Essentially, automata are mechanical figures able to simulate life without relying on electricity. They amused and amazed their Victorian audiences. One of Robert-Houdin's creations, the fantastic orange tree, is recreated today by magic designer John Gahn.
Well, this wonderful tree is a duplicate of one that was in Robert-Houdin's act in around 1845. And you would start off this piece by borrowing a handkerchief from a lady, and from another lady borrow a ring, and maybe from a gentleman you borrow a dollar bill of which he signs, and you put them all together and put them in a container which is set on fire, and mysterious smoke would go up in the air. And at that point, the music would start, and he would, Robert-Houdin would ask the audience to look closely at the tree, and you would actually see little flowers growing throughout the tree. And after the tree had blossomed, lo and behold, you would actually see little oranges start to grow. And now these oranges turned out to be real oranges, believe it or not. And these 4 or 5 down here would be picked off the tree and thrown to different members of the audience. And one of them would be given to the gentleman whom we borrowed the dollar bill from, and a knife, he would open it up, and well inside the orange was his borrowed dollar bill, signed by himself. We'd come back to the tree, and there would be just one orange still left on top, and it would split open, and inside we would find the borrowed handkerchief and 2 wonderful butterflies. Pick it up in the air, and in the middle of the handkerchief would also be the borrowed ring.
Then there is a 34-inch high figure known to magicians around the world as Antonio Diavolo. 150 years after he was first introduced to audiences, Antonio is still alive, lovingly restored by John Gahn.
Now, I believe, yes, Antonio is going to attempt to do a handstand, and he's been rehearsing this all week, so let's bear with him here. Come on, little fella. Oh, almost, Antonio. Very good. Get the feet up, almost. Come on, that's 1. There we go, Antonio, there we go. Very good. Oh, yes, very good, Antonio.
This was his co-star who was programmed and taught, so to speak, to do a certain routine. And he'll do that routine for us today. And watching it, we get a sense, for the first time in many, many years, what it's really like to see a performance of Robert-Houdin's. It's a great thrill for anyone involved in magic to see Antonio go through his paces.
Now be careful, this is where you fell, Antonio. Oh my gosh, look at that. Oh, Antonio, get back up there. Oh, very good. Amazing, Antonio. Yes.
By the late 1840s, Robert-Houdin had established himself as a new kind of performer. Taking magic into the parlors soon led to magic appearing on the stages of legitimate theaters. Robert-Houdin would tour England and France as a magician, playing such prominent venues as the St. James Theatre, entertaining for a personage no less than Her Majesty Queen Victoria. And in the early 1850s, he was able to do something beyond taking magic off the street and into the theater. He built his own theater.
Houdin builds his own theater, the Robert-Houdin Theater, which held, I think, 180 or about 200 seats.
But then he decorated the set on the stage to look exactly like a very elegant society Parisian drawing room with Louis XV furniture and very expensive accoutrements. But it was a well-equipped theater under all of this. He could do his performance that was designed to look like a parlor presentation, a parlor amusement, and secretly have the advantage of all of the secret lighting and stage traps and all of these things that he needed to effect his illusions.
He did a number of things, including introducing what's called a second sight trick. Modern audiences would know this is a form of mentalism. He would blindfold his son on stage, and audience members would bring objects. The son, without seeing the objects, was able to identify them as Houdin worked his way through the audience and challenged people to come up with weird or unusual things for his son to divine as such.
Today, mentalism acts are still a definite crowd pleaser, as witnessed by the performance of Jeff and Tessa Evison as they entertain a corporate audience.
I keep getting a shape and a sound like a gun. Does that make sense?
What kind of certificate is this, sir?
Gun.
This is a gun certificate. Very good. And no, go on. Do you know his first name, Tess? Don't say it.
This gentleman's scaring me. I think it's Ronald.
Sir, what is your first name?
Ronnie.
It's actually Ronnie. Have we ever met before?
No.
There's your gun certificate back. Thank you very much, Tess.
Thank you,
Take
sir.
your blindfold off, ladies and gentlemen. Give her a hand. The amazing Tessa.
Robert-Houdin, still in his 40s, had changed the very nature of magic. It was becoming a respectable theatrical art for the upper classes. Magicians were becoming celebrities. Few could imagine that Robert-Houdin's greatest success was still to come.
The bottom line is Robert-Houdin stopped a great deal of bloodshed with a single magic show. That's a miracle.
One can't even begin to assess the work of master magician Jean-Eugène Robert-Houdin without recognizing the manner in which his mechanical ability allowed him to stretch the art form.
Houdin was a watchmaker by profession, and that mechanical background gave him the basis to build and design many of the clever illusions that he presented. Yeah, the mystery clock was an ingenious mechanical device. While it wasn't marketed as a magic trick, it actually is an illusion of sorts. It's a glass clock where so many of the fittings and pieces are made of glass, such that the entire mechanism is transparent. The clock's hands look like they're floating. It really is a brilliant piece of apparatus, and it was something I think that Houdin was particularly proud of.
Another piece of which Robert-Houdin was justifiably proud was the crystal coin casket, now in the magic collection of Ken Klosterman. It was a highlight of Robert-Houdin's intimate stage show.
This would hang between his table on beautiful silk red cords, and he would throw coins to the crystal casket, and you would hear him leave one at a time and appear in the crystal casket until there were maybe 20 or 30 coins in the casket.
One could only imagine what he might have done with modern technology and chip technology and programming abilities and remote control switches and such.
One of the most remarkable creations was the pastry cook of the Palais Royal. In this illusion, a miniature mechanical pastry cook welcomed an audience member to his toy-like pastry shop, from which he served hot buns, cakes, ices, and liqueurs. And then there were illusions more suited to the large stage. One of the most enduring was known as the ethereal suspension, performed today by the Le Grand David Magic Company of Beverly, Massachusetts.
Houdin called it the ethereal suspension because what he did was take a very current invention, which was ether.
And he would actually scatter a bit of it around so people in the audience could smell it. And the impression was that his young son was under the influence of ether and could then float in the air.
And the audience, of course, could smell the ether. Of course, probably made the audience a little happier to be at the show. And he worked it into the show in such a way that many magicians have.
In 1854, Jean-Eugène Robert-Houdin, the Renaissance man, decided to retire from stage magic and devote his time to writing and the study of electricity and mechanics. The French government had different ideas, however. What was to follow would become one of the most legendary stories in magic, how a magician ended a war.
The French at that time were occupying Algiers. There was a group of religious clerics known as the marabouts, who were essentially inciting a revolt against the French. claiming that they had magical powers.
The emperor says, hey, we got some trouble in Algeria. There are these shaman guys, and they're dancing around pulling their teeth out and putting them back in and saying, see, I have powers you don't. I now rule your country.
So he sent Robert-Houdin, commissioned him to go down and try to stop this native uprising.
So Robert-Houdin goes to Algeria, quite a distance from France.
Now, Robert-Houdin could have done two things. He could have gone and exposed the tricks of the local magicians, or he could do greater tricks, and I think he chose the obvious path that any showman would take.
He held an apple on a sword, and he said, fire, I'll catch it, I'll protect myself. He said, fire at me, and I'll stop it. So he holds the apple on the sword, says, fire, boom, bullets in the apple, throws it down, they go, ah, so what? You know, you catch bullets in apples, big deal, I'm ripping teeth out of my mouth. And he says, oh yeah, well, check this out, fire again. Didn't expect it, boom, catches it in the teeth, spits it out. All of a sudden, the shaman from Algeria, uh-oh, this guy's good.
But the one that really stopped the war, stopped the killing, was a trick called the light and heavy chest.
He cast his spell over the man and showed he was such a powerful magician he could take away the man's strength. The man could no longer pick up the box.
The light and heavy chest still exists today in the collection of Ken Klosterman, and its abilities can still be tested.
In the name of Napoleon II and Robert-Houdin, you have lost your strength. You may try to lift this, but you will not succeed. You may try, but you will not succeed. Don't break the handle now, just to make a point. But that's light and heavy chest. And the other interesting thing is that I can put the strength back in you if you want that to happen. Do you want it to happen?
Yeah.
You sure?
I do.
All right. It's difficult, but I will try. You now are strong. You're able to lift the box.
All right.
The bottom line is Robert-Houdin stopped a great deal of bloodshed with a single magic show, and that's a miracle.
Robert-Houdin finished his autobiography in 1858, and it would go on to become the Bible of magicians, much discussed, much dissected. Interestingly, it is here that we first hear of a mentor of Robert-Houdin's, a magician named Torini, who aided him in his early days. However, most scholars dismiss this aspect of the book.
There's a great deal of melodrama built into Houdin's autobiography, and one of those elements is the Torini story about how he was sort of down and out, and Torini helped him out. But the truth of the matter is, I think it was Houdin's grandson who admitted, look, that was just something my grandfather made up. That was not a real person.
Robert-Houdin would live on another 13 years until on June 13, 1871, the great magician passed away. His legacy, however, carried on.
Certainly he did something that he knew nothing about at all, which was to give Eric Weiss his name when Eric Weiss decided that he would call himself a name which he thought meant like Houdin, and he put I on the end of it. He was wrong in this supposition, as he later found out, but nonetheless, he did take the name Houdini.
Harry Houdini belonged to the new century, and in its early years, he established himself as the most famous name in magic. At first, he openly admitted his idolization of the late French illusionist. Then, things changed.
When he was in France playing in Paris, he decided he would take a trip to the town where Robert-Houdin was born and visit his grave and lay a wreath of flowers there in Robert-Houdin's honor. He was very peeved when he went to Robert-Houdin's house, and Robert-Houdin's widow wouldn't see him, wouldn't talk to him, and then wouldn't give him permission to put the flowers on the grave. Houdini did not take, rejection well, to say the least. I mean, if he was rebuffed, he got very angry. He later wrote an extraordinary book called The Unmasking of Robert-Houdin. He tried to show that none of the things that had been credited to Robert-Houdin really belonged to him, that Robert-Houdin was not the father of modern magic, that he was not the person who had first appeared on stage in ordinary street clothes. He simply tried to destroy Robert-Houdin's reputation, even to the extent of saying the famous autobiography of Robert-Houdin wasn't even written by Robert-Houdin.
Houdini wrote, "He purloined the ideas of magicians long dead and buried and proclaims these as the fruits of his own inventive genius. That he might be known to posterity as the king of conjurers, he sold his birthright of manhood and honor."
I think that as time goes on, he looks more embarrassing. He would have been much better served to have accepted that Robert-Houdin was a very important performer and leave it at that.
From a magician's point of view, I think it was a sad affair.
Harry Houdini, when he came down on Robert-Houdin, I think was being a bad boy. I don't think he should have done it.
In the last generation, we've seen Robert-Houdin, the importance of Robert-Houdin coming back to the forefront. Robert-Houdin was a fantastic businessman. He was a fantastic theater manager. He had a fantastic sense of what the audience wanted to see. Wonderful, talented writer, and he wrote some of the most important books ever written on magic, conveying not only the secrets, but very important aspects of the secrets, so that his students understood the art.
Of course, as with all legendary figures, there is always another point of view.
The legend is better than the performance.
His name is Harry Houdini, and he was one of a kind. As the world's most famous escape artist, he brought magic to the masses. He was also a very complex man who would do almost anything for audience adulation.
The intensity of his competitiveness surpasses anything in my experience, at least.
They would almost break down theater doors to get in to see him.
He was one of the greatest showmen this or any century has ever known.
He would milk his audiences. He would make them cry and cheer.
He has come to define what we mean when we use the word magic.
You can walk down the streets even today and ask a child Houdini, and he looks at you and he says, magic. That doesn't happen with any other magician.
Harry Houdini, the greatest escape artist the world has ever known, promised his wife that if he died before she did, he would try to return to her from beyond the grave. From a less audacious man, such a vow would be ludicrous. His resolve to cheat even death carried a strange plausibility, so much so that thousands of people regard his death as only the first act. Every October 31st, many gather at seances to see if Houdini will live up to his pledge. Interest in the master mystifier is as pervasive as ever. There have been magic shops, books, theatrical productions, and films. The question is how Houdini has managed to defy death and time to become such a hero and icon.
He became the ultimate meaningful magician because his magic was really about something. He tapped into people's need and needs of the time. The sense that they were going through of this overwhelming mechanization of the age, that humans were just becoming cogs in big wheels. And Harry stood up and said, no, there's nothing that can hold back the individual human spirit. Nothing can keep us down, that you need to struggle to break free.
The other part of it is that he was doing miracles. I mean, you have to go back to biblical times, really, to find anything comparable to some of the things that Houdini did. They seemed like real magic.
Houdini walked through brick walls. He escaped from jail cells. He even made an elephant vanish in front of thousands. The life of Houdini is the stuff from which legends are made. More often than not, the author of those legends was Houdini himself. Sid Radner inherited the largest collection of Houdini artifacts from Houdini's magician brother, Houdin. His fascination gives him a unique perspective into the legend of Harry Houdini.
One of the things he gave me was the original biography of Houdini, which in this particular copy is intriguing because if you look in the flyleaf, you'll see what's written. First, what he wrote on one side of the page, in which he wrote, Theo Houdin, brother of Houdini, this book is full of lies.
The lies surrounding Houdini's life begin with his birth. Records prove that Houdini was born in Budapest, Hungary in 1874. However, Houdini claimed to be born in Appleton, Wisconsin. Separating fact from fiction has been a long-term labor of love for Houdini biographer Ken Silverman.
He came with his family to America, to the States, when he was 4 years old. I think that's explained simply by the psychology of a lot of immigrants who didn't want to be known as greenhorns, and a lot of people who came to the States or to Canada from Europe, insisted that they had really been born here.
Devotees of the American dream have found inspiration in the story of Harry Houdini.
I identify myself very much with Harry Houdini, being the typical immigrant overachiever. I found it to be very inspiring to me. This little immigrant boy from Hungary became what he did, became what he became, and still around us.
Chasing the American dream was not easy for the Weiss family. Houdini was born Eric Weiss, one of 6 children. Cecilia Weiss, Houdini's mother, maintained that he never cried as a baby, and like most boys, he found magicians fascinating. Houdini's father, Samuel Weiss, found it difficult to make ends meet as a rabbi in Appleton, Wisconsin. He moved his family to Milwaukee and then to New York City to find work.
They were so badly off in Milwaukee that they had to apply to a charity just to get coal for the winter and to borrow $50 to keep them going. He didn't do any better in New York either. And ultimately, when Houdini was about 16, his father developed tongue cancer and died of that. The failure of his father, Rabbi Weiss, was always a big spur for Houdini. He was always afraid of ending up broke and old, like his father. There's a wonderful place in his diary where he talks about being in front of a pawn shop and he sees some trophies that were given to some famous person, and now the trophies are ending up in the pawn shop. And he did have this kind of fear that he was going to end up that way, that he too might become very famous but then end up as an old man, broke and unknown.
Young Eric Weiss vowed to make things better for his family. At 12, he left home and worked as a shoeshine boy. By 19, he joined a carnival.
He worked in cheap circuses, not big circuses, where he sometimes performed as a wild man. I mean, he served also to, be in a cage, and you could throw meat into the cage at him. Also, very importantly, he worked as an acrobat. It's not generally known about Houdini, but he worked out with some acrobats in the circus, and it's unappreciated, but he was a very strong, very acrobatic person.
By 1894, Eric was performing as a card manipulator. At 17, he took the name Houdini from the famous French illusionist Robert-Houdin, his magician hero. His first name, Harry, came from Airy, the pet name his mother called him. Houdini performed with his brother Theo, who took the stage name Houdin. While performing in Coney Island, Harry met his future wife, Bess. They were married in just 2 weeks. The thought of the innocent Bess working at Coney Island would not be appropriate for his image, so throughout his life, in all published accounts, he stated that they met on a streetcar.
Actually, she was traveling with a Floridora girls, traveling as a dancer in a rather cheap type of act. And in those days, girls in show business doing that exactly weren't the most respectable.
She told me she met him at a little place in Coney Island, and she was singing, and he was very poor.
Dorothy Young Kiami got to know Bess Houdini very well. She was an assistant on Houdini's last tour in 1926.
They were a loving couple. They knew each other well, they were acclimated, and they had nice expressions, loving expressions that come across the table, but they weren't obviously affectionate.
Despite his love for Bess, Harry made it very clear that there was another woman in his life. After the death of his father, the support of his mother fell to Houdini and his brothers. Harry swore he would take care of his beloved mother, and he did so in spectacular fashion. After making it big in vaudeville, he showered her with $1,000 in gold coins, a week's salary.
He wrote to his mother constantly. The reason we don't have any of his letters to his mother is that at his death, in his will, he asked that all his letters to his mother be taken and tied up and used as the pillow in his coffin. And in fact, that was done. The letters were all gathered up, and he was buried with them together. It was an extremely close relationship. It's hard to know how Bess Houdini really tolerated it.
When Houdini married Bess, she replaced his brother Houdin as his assistant. But it was a constant struggle. They performed a mind-reading act and magic tricks. They also performed the metamorphosis as their main illusion.
That was probably the trick that started his career. It was the most famous trick, and he puzzled lots and lots of people. Today it's done by lots of magicians and done very well.
He did it bang, bang. It was literally 1, 2, 3, and the exchange was made. He wasn't the first one to do it. I mean, there are several other people who were doing something very like the substitution trunk, but he advertised to do it faster than anybody else. One of Houdini's greatest achievements on the stage, and the thing that he really prided himself on most, was the so-called challenge handcuff act. Early in his career, before he became a big vaudeville star, he would invite people to bring up their own handcuffs, and he would offer to get out of them.
Houdini's aggressive ambition elevated him from sideshow performer to magician in just 6 years. Yet despite his initial success, he was still waiting for that big break.
The famous story is that an agent in Chicago, Martin Beck, who was the head of the big Western vaudeville circuit, saw Houdini perform in Minneapolis, saw him doing some handcuff escapes, and said to him, well, look, that's what you really should be doing. This is what you're really good at. This is what audiences really respond to.
Beck hired Houdini to appear on the vaudeville circuit, where Houdini began to develop his escapes. They evolved into powerful visual symbols representing the strength of the human spirit. Unfortunately, American audiences did not respond as enthusiastically as he'd expected. In an ironic move for the Patriot, Bess and Harry left America, risking all they had on a bold plan to conquer the music halls of Europe. In 1900, Harry and Bess Houdini arrived in England. Harry immediately began to formulate plans to conquer the British music halls. In a bold move, Houdini convinced the manager of a London theater to accompany him to the headquarters of Scotland Yard, where he demonstrated his amazing abilities. Houdini was silent as an officer handcuffed him around a pole and commented, "That's the way we lock 'em up around here." Houdini freed himself instantly and replied, "And that's the way we get out of them in America." He was booked for a theater engagement on the spot, and he opened the following week.
Over the next 3 years, he took Europe by storm. He became a tremendous star of the British music halls, and an even greater star maybe of the German cabaret and circus and vaudeville circuit.
They would almost break down theater doors to get in to see him. He was beginning to get some of the highest salaries, and eventually got the highest salaries of any entertainer in Europe.
The novelty of Houdini's act was part of the reason for his huge success in Europe. His compact, muscular body, the result of disciplined exercise, made Houdini the world's first sex symbol.
Houdini was a very good-looking man, highly athletic. I think he saw a little bit of sex, too, also, with his performances.
He often did them naked to show that he had nowhere to hide his keys.
He was very different to the conventional magician coming out, the stuffy magician with a rabbit coming out of a hat. And so he caused quite a splash in Europe.
Another reason for Houdini's great success was his showmanship. Before Houdini, escapes had very little theatrical flair. Part of his genius was his ability to develop escapes into suspenseful theater.
Houdini did more than just escape from things. Houdini was one of the greatest showmen to ever walk the face of the earth. Houdini knew more than just to get out of these challenges and these boxes and these handcuffs quickly. He would milk his audiences, and he would make them cry and cheer, and he always looked disadvantaged, and he would escape from this. Sometimes it took, long periods of time, half an hour, 45 minutes.
Of all the escapes he performed in Europe, his greatest and most controversial feat was the mirror handcuff escape.
It was advertised on the buses in London. I mean, the buses carried Houdini on them all around town. It was really front-page news. What happened was that one of the leading London papers challenged Houdini to get out of a pair of handcuffs that a locksmith in Birmingham had taken about literally 7 years to make.
Concealed by a waist-high curtained cabinet, Houdini began his task at 3:15 in the afternoon. Houdini escaped from the mirror cuffs in about an hour. Many believe that it was technically impossible for Houdini to pick the locks of the handcuffs.
The great Randy, who was probably the leading escape artist since Houdini's time, said he had to have had the key, that no one could have picked these cuffs.
Picture it this way. If Houdini fails, everybody feels bad. Houdini and his wife, the newspaper is reviled as taking advantage of this visitor from America. But if he gets out, everybody's happy. The newspaper's got a wonderful story, Houdini's got a wonderful engagement, and I think that Mrs. Houdini simply went to the reporter and laid it on the line. Look, we're going to fail, and you're going to fail, and everybody's going to feel really nasty, or vice versa. Which is it going to be? And they slipped him the key.
In addition to highly publicized events like the mirror cuffs, Houdini advertised his shows with large outdoor escapes.
Houdini was really sort of turning the downtown areas of cities into a theater. He made this huge civic theater with 100,000 people watching his performances. I guess maybe the closest thing might be, a Rolling Stones concert or something like that, where, the stadium's packed with, 70 or 80,000 people going crazy. But Houdini offered it free, and it was all a great come-on for his show that night.
After Houdini's tremendous success in Europe, he returned to America and immediately began to improve his illusions and escapes.
One of the really most interesting things to me about Houdini's career is its development, its evolution. He was constantly improving what he did. And it's interesting to see him take an escape, a particular escape, and work on it over his career into more and more dramatic and more bold and risky versions.
It took Houdini years to develop the dramatics that would make his escapes work as stage entertainment. One of his masterpieces was called the milk can escape.
He would get into a big galvanized milk can, sort of snuggle into it, though it was very tight. That would then be filled with water or with milk or occasionally with beer, and then that would be padlocked. And a little screen would be put around it, bang, very fast. The screen would be taken away, and there was Houdini standing there, sort of dripping wet, but there was the milk can next to him, and the padlocks were still on. People, in fact, could bring their own locks and padlock it with their own locks, and you'd still get out very quickly. Obviously, the idea of putting the water in there made it more exciting and more dangerous.
Houdini's spectacular success made him one of the most imitated acts in vaudeville. Houdini imitators popped up everywhere. Acts like Harry Houdini.
Just cutting an I at the end, or adding an E, or omitting an H, Houdini, or Houdinini, or what have you.
A gal in Germany used the name Miss Undina, U-N-D-I-N-A, and she had a poster made, almost a duplicate of Houdini's posters.
And he would go crazy, bonkers, when somebody used his name.
Houdini slapped a lawsuit on her.
I treasure my lawsuits. I don't know why, it's personal preference of Houdini. Irate because someone was using his name and proceeding to write to an attorney and filing a suit immediately from preventing that performer to use his name in any way, shape, or form.
Houdini was not only litigious, but downright ruthless in the pursuit of his imitators, even resorting to using rigged handcuffs.
As escape artists began to challenge and duplicate some of Houdini's stunts, Houdini doctored some of his handcuffs so that when he challenged them, and they did challenge each other, they would have a pair of handcuffs which they thought would open up with a key like this, but actually didn't. It opened up with a key like this. And they would beg to be taken out, and Houdini would only get them out at the end of the show. He made them sweat it out, and then would release them at that time after they would remove their claims that they defeated Houdini.
Houdini was certainly the most competitive person that I know anything about. I mean, the intensity of his competitiveness surpasses anything in my experience, at least. And Houdini could stand no rivals. And having really beaten out every other magician in the world, there weren't many people left for him to beat out but Robert-Houdin.
On a trip to Paris in 1902, Houdini made a pilgrimage to the grave of the great illusionist Robert-Houdin, the magician from whom he adopted his stage name. He asked for permission to lay flowers on his hero's grave, but Robert-Houdin's family refused to see him. His response to this perceived insult was the book The Unmasking of Robert-Houdin. In it, Houdini called Robert-Houdin the Prince of Pilferers and wrote, "He purloined the ideas of magicians long dead and buried and proclaimed these as the fruits of his own inventive genius. That he might be known as the King of Conjurers, he sold his birthright of manhood and honor."
I think that as time goes on, he looks more embarrassing, Houdini. He looks, it becomes more obvious that he had a vendetta.
The attempted destruction of Robert-Houdin's reputation had to do with getting rid of all rivals, finally, even historical rivals.
Houdini's ego had run rampant. The amount of newspaper publicity he obtained, the attention lavished on him by the public, and his enormous box office draw all contributed to his excessive personality. Some describe him as unbearable, always expecting to be the subject of conversation, never failing to be the center of every photograph. On one occasion, Bess Houdini was seen pacing backstage, calling attention to her husband's frequent use of I and me as he addressed the audience. But on July 17, 1913, Houdini's beloved mother died. It was an event that would forever alter Harry Houdini.
It really unseated him, so much so that, you know, for a long while there, he gives up magic and escapes almost altogether. He starts doing completely different kinds of things. I mean, he almost gave up his career in show business.
A magician is not a juggler, he is an actor playing a role, the role of a sorcerer. So wrote the celebrated French conjurer Robert-Houdin. If Robert-Houdin had the gift of prophecy, he may have foreseen the arrival of his namesake, Harry Houdini. In the history of conjuring, no actor has been more celebrated. His complex, enigmatic personality still captivates us 7 decades after his death. But what was behind the drive and the intensity of Houdini is as much a mystery as the illusions he performed. He was a mass of contradictions.
Houdini was certainly the most competitive person that I know anything about. I mean, the intensity of his competitiveness surpasses anything in my experience, at least.
When you analyze Houdini, his greatest ability was his ability to get press. And he did nothing without a camera, without a reporter there.
And I would like to have them make him the way he really was, very low-key outside of the stage. He was a very wonderful, kind man.
Born Eric Weiss, one of 5 sons of impoverished Jewish immigrants, he worked his way through cheap dime museums and burlesque shows to become the highest paid variety performer of his time. By 1912, Houdini, through his own ingenuity, daring, and sizable ego, made himself into a household name. His performances were informed by the same story. He was always playing the role of the underdog, able to escape adversity despite overwhelming odds. Separating the real Houdini from the legend has been a labor of love for Houdini biographer Kenneth Silverman.
To me, one of the most extraordinary moments in Houdini's diary is the first time he did a manacled bridge jump escape. This is a very dangerous escape. He would be handcuffed, and then he would get on the top of a bridge, and sometimes leg cuffed too, jump into the water, handcuffed, and he would disappear underneath and have to somehow get out. A very, very dangerous stunt. His diary entry describing it, at the end of it, he has in big capital letters with exclamation points, "Ma saw me jump, Ma saw me jump."
Houdini was the classic dutiful son. He once wrote, "If God in his infinite wisdom ever set an angel upon earth in human form, it was my mother." It's difficult to understand how his wife Bess tolerated such absolute devotion.
He made it very clear to his wife, Bess, that the other woman in his life was his mother. Actually, it turns out she wasn't the only other woman in his life. I mean, the one affair that we know that Houdini had was with the widow of Jack London, the famous writer. Interestingly, one of the things that Houdini said to her, to Charmian London, when he got involved with her, very, very typical, the highest praise he could think of giving her was, "I would have told her, my mother, about you." It's the highest form of praise he can think of giving.
Houdini remained very close to his mother until her death in 1913. He received news of her passing while performing in Denmark, and he fainted immediately after reading the cable.
It really put him in a tailspin. For the first time, really, he stopped performing. He couldn't keep his dates. He really couldn't work anymore. His diaries are filled with just endless talk about his mother. He writes to everyone about her.
Mario Carandi is a successful collector and dealer in all things related to Harry Houdini. His collection gives him a unique perspective into the many facets of Houdini's personality.
After a while, owning so many Houdini documents and signatures, you can catch his mood. You can catch his speed when he writes his signature. When he's upset about something, I have letters that saying that so-and-so, I caught him at it, he deceived me, and his H's are very bold, and you can see he expresses his anger on the handwriting. In my collection of letters, I have several letters that I consider important, written personal letters, expressing emotions, expressing missing his mother.
Subsequent to his mother's death, Houdini wrote his brother Dasha, "It's tough, and I can't seem to get over it. Sometimes I feel all right, but when a calm moment arrives, I feel as bad as ever. Time heals all wounds, but a long time will have to pass before it will heal this terrible blow. The death of Houdini's mother increased his preoccupation with spiritualism, a movement sweeping through Europe and America. Mediums claimed to be able to make contact with the dead, who supposedly would reveal themselves at seances through levitations, handwriting, and knocking sounds.
Houdini's interest in spiritualism came at one of its heights when there was a lot of it going on, and he did have a desire to talk to his mother, and that created his reason for going to see spiritualists.
Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of the legendary Sherlock Holmes, was an evangelist for the spiritualist movement. He had a strong belief in the maintenance of personal identity after death. Despite their different beliefs, Houdini and Doyle corresponded for 3 years and became very good friends.
Doyle's wife was a spiritualist, a medium, and Doyle offered to prepare a seance for Houdini at which his wife would try to get in touch with Houdini's mother. They met in Atlantic City, and at the hotel room, Doyle's wife went into a trance and started doing automatic writing. She wrote 16 whole pages of message from Houdini's mother, and the messages said, "My dear son, how glad I am to be in contact with you. You have no idea how joyful I am here." Doyle, after the seance, was just ecstatic. I mean, that he had been able to give Houdini proof of the afterlife.
Well, his mother came through, it seemed for a time, by writing the sign of the cross, addressing Harry as Harry, and then speaking to him in English. This was all fine, except that she barely spoke a word of English. She always talked in German. She always called him Eric, his true name. And she was married to a rabbi, which kind of makes the cross unlikely. Oops.
It left very bitter feelings. In fact, although he had been close with Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, after another 2 or 3 years, they really drifted apart in a lot of bitterness.
He felt his intelligence was insulted. And perhaps he also felt personally insulted because he was very much affected by the death of his mother, and in an open-minded, exploratory kind of way, was willing to look at a seance or two at the time to see if there was something to it, and was deeply offended by the level of obvious deception that was going on.
As a result, Houdini vigorously attacked the spiritualist movement. Insisting that mediums were merely doing tricks, he duplicated their techniques. He attended spiritualist meetings in disguise and denounced the mediums, forever seeking to expose the fakes.
Harry busted every major medium he could get his hands on during that period in his life.
Why he went about it with such energy is, it's interesting to speculate about. For one thing, he recognized that the mediums were doing some of the same things he was doing, but claiming to do them by supernatural means. He also, being a straight shooter, and as he always presented himself, resented the fact that the spiritualist mediums were thieving really often off very poor people. They were people who couldn't afford the money. Houdini, he was such a moralistic sort of guy. He also had the feeling that what spiritualist mediums told their clients led to divorces, broke up families, that it led people finally to become insane.
Houdini's mission to expose mediums seemed to be keeping him from his escape work, but there were other reasons.
He knew that he was starting to get a little long in the tooth for these incredibly demanding physical things he was doing. He was thinking of retiring at that stage in his career. He didn't know what he wanted to quite do.
It made sense. By 1918, Houdini's world was changing. Vaudeville was slowly dying as the new medium of film squeezed live entertainment out of theaters. He responded by transforming himself once again. In 1921, after starring in several films, he formed the Houdini Motion Picture Company. The new medium, he concluded, was the perfect place to showcase his daring escapes and preserve his legend for generations to come.
In The Man from Beyond, which was really Houdini's first picture, he's been frozen into a block of ice. I mean, he's somebody who's died in the 19th century, as I remember, on some kind of whaling vessel, and he's been frozen in Arctic ice, and he's chipped out. and he returned to life. He's taken back somehow to New York. And what's very strange about that movie, among other things, is that the opening shot is of a passage from the Bible, really about immortality. And it closes also with a picture of a passage from the Bible about immortality. And this whole idea of his being able to survive in the ice alive after 100 years is sort of taken in the movie as a sign that the soul survives death, really as a kind of spiritualist argument. That's interesting because at the very same time, Houdini is exposing all of these spiritualist mediums and showing that, they're really fraudulent. I guess it reveals some kind of sneaking, lurking desire in him really to believe in the possibility of survival.
Although he threw himself into the movies with characteristic zeal, Houdini's film career was considered a complete disaster. There are some very fundamental and basic reasons for this.
Houdini didn't count on the fact that he was camera shy, especially when he came to holding a girl, kissing a girl.
Houdini was no actor. I mean, he's absolutely awful, I think, in the pictures.
He was no Barrymore, I can tell you that right now.
Houdini thought that he could not only be in it, he could direct it, he could write it, and he could produce it. That's one of the big mistakes he made.
By 1923, Houdini gave up any hope of a career in Hollywood. Down, but not beaten, he increased his attacks on spiritualism and formulated yet another plan to revitalize his sagging career. At the age of 51, Houdini returned to magic and the stage. But unlike his vaudeville days, Houdini would now appear in a full evening show, booked to run in legitimate theaters. He opened in New York's Schubert Theater in December 1925. Pretty good, he wrote in his diary, for Dime Museum Houdini.
When he toured with his final show, he achieved really a lifelong dream of having a full evening of which there was a significant portion of just straight magic. That was actually something that had taken Harry most of his life to do, because in vaudeville you didn't do full evening performances. You did a quick vaudeville turn, which was the escape act and the water torture cell, or the escape act earlier and the metamorphosis. And so that final tour was the one chance he had to really mount a magic show that he had always dreamed of.
He was doing things like, he had a big cabinet that looked like a radio, and he would tune the dials. He would show the cabinet empty, tune the dials, music would start coming out, and out from the top of the cabinet would pop a girl, and she would sort of be wearing her scanties, and the radio would be playing a Charleston. She'd do a little Charleston.
In the early part of Houdini's final tour, the Charleston dancer was 17-year-old Dorothy Young, chosen from an audition of more than 200 hopefuls. When Dorothy approached her father with the news, he refused to let her tour with the show, and the Houdinis intervened.
They asked to meet my father, and they convinced him that they would look after me as their very own daughter. They didn't have children. And they did. They were just wonderful, warm parents to me. I always called him Houdini, never Mr. Houdini or no Harry Houdini, just Houdini. And best, Mrs. H. Mrs. H and I opened the show doing that dance, and then he did the usual things, with the scarves and then the needle trick.
He was producing flowers, he was producing rabbits, he was producing silk handkerchiefs. Really, for the first time in his life since the beginning of his career, he was doing magic.
While the first act of this Houdini show was straight magic, the second act featured his escape work. It concluded with his most infamous escape of all, the Chinese water torture cell.
Every night when the Chinese water torture cell came on, Mrs. H always stood in the wings, and I always stood with her because it was very exciting. Houdini would come out and in a bathing trunks, and they would lower him head first in this tank full of water. And the tank had a glass in front of it so you could see Houdini. Before they put the curtain around him, they would let the audience have a full view of him. It was really frightening. Every place we went, there was always a full house. And we were playing Chicago once, and the house was sold out, and I don't know how he got my grandmother a seat. So I took her backstage later to meet Houdini, and he kissed her forehead, and he said, "Now I know where Dorothy gets all of her charm," and my grandmother was so pleased. The only time I remember Houdini ever being the least bit disturbed in the whole year I was with them was we were playing Buffalo, and the Prohibition was on at the time. And Mrs. H, who was she was opposite in personality with Houdini. She was jovial and liked to cut up a little bit. And so she said, "How about taking a bottle of liquor over?" None of us drank. So we took smuggled a bottle of liquor. And at dinner that night, somehow it was mentioned, and Houdini's eyes snapped. And he said, "Do you realize the adverse publicity we would have had if they had found that bottle?" And that was the only time in the whole year I ever remember him being a little disturbed. Otherwise, he was very even. He was a super showman, but in real life, he was very low-key, a compassionate, very caring, kind man.
By October of 1926, Houdini's tour progressed to Montreal, where he played the Princess Theatre. Several McGill University students interviewed Houdini in his dressing room for their school newspaper. The events that followed have been clouded by the mystique of the Houdini legend.
One of the students was doing a sketch of him. A third student, according to the story, asked Houdini if he could punch him in the stomach and said to him, I've heard that you can take a punch to the stomach. Do you mind if I punch you? And Houdini apparently said, no, I don't mind. And as Houdini was getting up off the bed, the sort of couch that he was resting on, the student started hitting him very hard in the stomach, punching him a couple of times.
Following the show that night, Harry and Bess traveled to Detroit. He performed as planned, but in a great deal of pain. He finally consented to see a doctor after the show. Houdini was diagnosed with acute appendicitis, most likely aggravated by the blow to the stomach he had received in Montreal. Houdini died a week later, on Halloween 1926, of complications from a ruptured appendix. His body was taken back to New York City, where thousands gathered for his funeral. Since then, his legend has only grown, something many attribute more to Bess than anyone else.
I've seen at the Library of Congress a scrapbook that she compiled after Houdini's death. It's certainly the most crazy and unusual scrapbook I've ever seen. It's first of all about the size of a refrigerator. I mean, I've just never seen a book like this. She got clipping services throughout the world to send her any article of any kind that just mentioned Houdini's name. And she took every single mention of his name and pasted it into the scrapbook.
I know she was lost without him because he was her whole life. I look back, it must have been very, very difficult for her.
Houdini, the psychic basher, promised his wife Bess that if there was a way back from death, he would find it. In characteristic Houdini style, he thought of the afterworld as one more lock to be picked and conquered. Bess Houdini held seances in an attempt to contact him, but gave up in 1936. It is true, Houdini did not materialize in the way he envisioned, but in one way he did live up to his promise.
The fact that you can walk down the streets even today and ask a child, my neighbor across the street, 11 years old, Houdini, and he looks at you and he says, magic. That doesn't happen with any other magician.
Houdini was such a powerful character, so charismatic. His name is so revered and so much a part of our vocabulary that many magicians find themselves living in his shadow.
Not only is he the only magician to be included in most dictionaries, but his very name has become part of our language.
I was down in Florida last winter, and I was going to church, and the pastor was preaching on someone in Isaiah, and he said, I guess he was trying to pull a Houdini. We all laughed.
This last achievement contains the key to Houdini's continued hold on our imagination. Of all his remarkable transformations, Houdini's most impressive was his ability to turn himself into a metaphor that will last through the ages. In the history of grand illusions, there is a very remarkable family who helped set the standard for magic performance. All of the illusions you see here being performed today were a part of their story. In one sense, they are long gone. In another, they are very much alive. They are the Herman family.
I hope I get this right. Is it 1963?
Are you born in 63?
Yes, I am.
And they are still very much with us. When a child is asked to draw a picture of a magician, they usually, whether they know it or not, create an image of a member of the great Herman family. The wisping mustache, the evening clothes, the cape. It is the image most of us have of a magician, and it was the trademark of the remarkable Herman family. From Compars to Alexander to Leon to Felix, it was a look that came to epitomize deception, intrigue, and the all-knowing man of mythical talents who could read your mind or catch bullets out of thin air. They are largely forgotten now, but within the magic world, the Hermans were a family of firsts. The first international star magicians, the first to set the look of the magician, and the first woman solo performer. Illusions performed by the Hermans, such as the notorious bullet catch trick, in which the magician catches live rounds in his teeth, or on a plate, can still be found today, albeit in slightly different venues. Magician Ben Robinson recreated this illusion in 1990. Jeff McBride's incredible skill at card scaling thrills Vegas audiences. This trick, though, has its roots in the 19th century.
Alexander Herman could throw playing cards with legendary power and precision. He could bounce them off the walls of a balcony. He could land a card in the lap of any particular spectator in the audience. It was one of his most popular effects.
So the two different people send a clear thought. The strongest thought I have right now, the person has a card with them. And the card is
Jeff and Tessa's Second Sight act, in which they appear able to read the minds of audience members, is a great hit with corporate groups and audiences across the country. Few here know, however, that Jeff and Tessa's Second Sight act was a regular feature in the incredible touring show of Adelaide Herman, credited by most as the first great female magician.
Quite sure you know. Examine his thoughts.
Well, I wasn't sure at first, but I was wondering if that's Brian.
And your name is?
Brian.
Is it Brian Walsh?
Oh, is it Brian Walsh?
Yes.
Thank you very much, Brian. That's amazing.
Thank you.
Yes.
Card magic, performed here by Eugene Berger. The universal popularity of card magic can be traced back to Compars Herman, who played to packed houses all over the world.
Take the card that's come out for you, Catherine. You take the entire deck, and look, at these prices, it's the 9 of Hearts.
And then, of course, there are the truly grand effects, like the ghoulish cremation. But the story starts earlier than this. Germany, in the early 19th century. Samuel Herman, a physician, mixes magic with medicine, often working as a traveling showman. This is an era before great stage shows, when magicians lived the life of itinerant gypsies, street performers, or what was known as parlor prestidigitators.
Just let go for 1 second. Look at this. Look. Maybe, you know what might be better if I do it without the chopstick? You think so? Here, look, let me show you. Hold up your hand. Look, if I just squeeze it, see, it just goes. Looks like it disappears, huh? Look on the chopstick. Here, look.
After the birth of his son Compars in 1816, Samuel took his family to Paris. Much to Samuel's dismay and apparent surprise, the bohemian atmosphere didn't encourage his son's studies. Instead, Compars was entranced by the artistic life. Using stage skills learned by assisting his father, Compars joined an acting troupe. He flirted with medical school, but settled on performance and became a magician. In 1847, he took his show on the road and would soon garner an international reputation. He greatly impressed the Sultan of Turkey by cutting the heads off of a white chicken and a black chicken.
And then he switched them, and he put the white head on the black chicken, the black head on the white chicken. And the Sultan wanted him to do it with a black slave and a white slave. And Compars declined to perform that effect.
Of course, Compars was not the only Herman. According to legend, Compars kidnapped his little brother Alexander, who was 28 years his junior, to work as his apprentice and assistant.
When he was 8 years old, his brother Compars conspired with him to run off as his assistant, and the story sort of always said that he kidnapped his brother.
Always looking for new horizons and territory, in 1859, Compars became one of the first magicians to tour overseas. In this case, he made sure that his reputation preceded him.
When he came to the United States in 1861, he was hailed as the premier prestidigitator of the world.
The reception was both rapturous and prosperous. At the New York Academy of Music, the box office take was $35,000 in just 5 weeks. Kampar's show might seem unusual for the venues. He would perform close-up magic effects that would astonish large audiences in 1,500-seat theaters. Today, however, we can gain a glimpse of what Kampar's show was like. Magicians such as Lance Burton emulate Kampar's style by performing close-up magic in large theater settings. A variation on one of Kampar's most famous illusions, the inexhaustible bottle, was still being performed by the amazing Kreskin in the 1970s.
There really isn't any. As a matter of fact, would you come forward and just hold the bottom of the vase with both hands? Bottom. That would be under the bottom. Now, would you come over here and do likewise? Hold the bottom here, just the bottom. Now, hold it a little bit higher. It's going to be an interesting phenomenon because there are no attachments. There's no way of my entering anything into it. And yet, folks, watch. All I do is hold my hand over it now. And can you folks describe to me, do you notice something happening? What do you notice happening, my friend? Heavier. It's getting heavier. You can feel it gaining weight. Even though I'm not touching it and there are no hoses up their sleeves, especially his. And yet, look, we've waited long enough because it has filled up again. Quite a while. Isn't that wild? Really good.
Kampar's Herman would perform right up to his death in 1887. At this point, his brother Alexander would carry on the Herman legacy. It was logical and, in fact, inevitable. Alexander had already become a superlative magician. Headlining his own act, he effortlessly transformed himself into Herman the Great, mesmerizing audiences with his charisma and skill. When most magicians say Herman, they are usually referring to Alexander.
Alexander Herman was one of a kind. He really had a genius in the ability to make himself attractive to an audience.
The greatest magician of all time was Alexander Herman. He could walk into an audience and produce rabbits without any equipment.
Alexander Herman made it fun.
Alexander's act was quite different from his brother's. He preferred larger scale illusions and became known for large props and elaborate stagings. It made sense. By the 1870s, magic had entered theaters appropriate for large-scale illusions, to say nothing of technical innovations that made such illusions possible. Some of the illusions included decapitation, spirit cabinets, and the legendary bullet catch. It was terrifyingly effective. A firing squad would position itself in front of Herman and fire at him with bullets marked by the audience. Herman would catch the bullets on a plate. There seems to be a gothic and macabre sensibility to many of the Herman effects. Certainly one of the most ghoulish and effective, the one that seems to follow the bullet catch with perfect logic, is the cremation. Performed by Las Vegas headliners Kalen and Ginger today, it has lost none of its potency. Alexander was a bona fide success, and it showed in an offstage style as flamboyant as his onstage persona.
This was a guy who traveled around the United States in a private railroad car, which was a fairly flamboyant way to travel, certainly an expensive way to travel. But before he got to any town, he climbed out of his railroad car and climbed into a chariot that would be drawn by two powerful steeds, and he would ride a chariot into town. When Alexander Herman arrived in your town, something big was happening.
Using his own private railway car, he toured the United States on the newly completed Transcontinental Railroad. In 1874, Alexander met and fell in love with a fiery dancer named Adelaide Scarcey. She would leave an indelible mark upon Herman's act and legacy.
course, they were doing these fantastic dances where they kicked their heels up literally and showed their legs, and people were going nuts. They just thought that was just outrageous to see a lady's leg. So she was sort of on the cutting edge.
Adelaide and Alexander Herman were married in 1875, and she joined Alexander on stage. Audiences were enchanted by the lithe and sultry beauty who matched Alexander in both wit and artistry. She turned heads with her racy solo dance numbers, and she holds the distinction of being the first magic assistant to receive co-billing status. Magicians today credit Adelaide with changing many of the prevailing views of women in show business.
And as authority figures in those times, it was very hard for a woman to carry off that role. We were in a paternalistic society where men were the authorities. So for Adelaide Herman to perform and succeed the way she did, and she had a remarkable career, it really puts her in one of the most outstanding positions in the history of magic.
The lives of both Hermans were extravagant. Alexander's wealth and fame was beyond his father and brother's wildest dreams. He owned a mansion in Long Island, a yacht, and even had his own private railway car. The Hermans lived extravagantly, but it would come back to haunt Adelaide later. In 1896, the Herman Company was leaving New York State on the very first leg of a tour across the United States. Alexander was in his rail car, smoking one of his favorite Herman cigars, when he was seized with chest pains. They wired for a doctor to meet them at the next stop, but it was too late. Alexander would die on that train.
Adelaide was right at his side, and she had her arms around him, and he finally looked at her and said, "I guess I'm not going to get over this. Be sure to take the company back to New York." And he died. The newspapers literally said, "Well, Herman the Great is dead. Magic is dead."
Adelaide had little time to grieve. Alexander had been at one of his financial lows. A terrible fact soon became apparent.
He didn't leave any money.
If Adelaide was broke, there was at least a full season of bookings ahead, so within days of burying her beloved Alexander, she sent for Alexander's nephew, Leon. Leon Herman was an ambitious 29-year-old cabaret performer working at the Folies Bergère in Paris. The young man jumped at the chance to ride on the coattails of the greatest magician of all time. Introducing her nephew as the successor to Herman the Great, Adelaide and Leon set upon the tour planned for Alexander. Leon soon proved to be a skilled practitioner at one of the most popular magic tricks of all time, the levitation, performed here by Brett Daniels. While Leon gained a reputation as a skilled and innovative magician, and Adelaide was featured prominently, it was a short-lived union. Audiences felt that Leon was no Alexander.
Leon, I think, unfortunately, was judged very harshly against Alexander. Alexander was so congenial, and Leon didn't speak English. His English was very poor at first.
Shortly after they began performing together, a cartoon parody appeared. The point was clear: Leon could not fill Alexander's shoes. Since there could only be one Herman the Great, in 1899, Adelaide made the audacious decision to go solo as a magician in her own right. Her first tour took her west.
Well, the West was still the Wild West in 1900, much of it. And for a woman to pack around a big illusion show and on her own, with just her and her company, that took a lot of fortitude and courage.
If you were a female entertainer, you were at the edge. You were definitely at the edge. No matter how clean your act was, the very idea that you didn't marry and you went from city to city without a chaperone was outrageous. A few women picked a career, period, and to pick a career where you're out in the world on your own, in a powerful position, is, it would just have to be groundbreaking.
Groundbreaking indeed. Many people were surprised at her daring in perpetuating some of the more dangerous illusions, including the bullet catch trick. Adelaide was chastised both for performing the illusion and, perhaps worse, performing it in slacks. Overall, it was Adelaide's determination that kept alive her husband's penchant for grand spectacular shows, and they were spectacular.
When we look at the pictures of this today, I mean, it looks like a setting for a grand opera.
But Adelaide could not repeat Alexander's show. While her show would always carry the unmistakable Herman stamp, lavish sets and multiple assistants, it would soon also be infused with a feminine quality. Modern illusionist Jade gives us a sense of Adelaide's act, which began to use subtle music and was filled with a sense of growth and replenishment, represented here by this overflowing rice bowl illusion. After his professional break with Adelaide, Leon decided to make productive use of his famous uncle's title, cheekily billing himself as Herman the Great. Fiercely protective of her late husband's name, Adelaide hauled Leon to court, but her injunction attempts failed, and Leon used the name for the duration of his career. The Herman name was obviously good as gold at the box office, for Adelaide soon found herself launching another unsuccessful suit to protect her husband's legacy. This time it was her nephew, Felix. Felix Kretschm had been exposed to magic his entire life, having spent time as a child at the New York home of his Aunt Adelaide and Uncle Alexander. A former assistant to his cousin Leon, Felix was intent on becoming the next in a long line of great Hermans.
He appeared at the Musée Eden in New York City. And then he started booking other shows, and his career just started growing.
By all accounts, Felix was a talented performer who truly upheld the family name, despite Adelaide's disapproval and the fact that he was not a true Herman. Felix died in New Orleans in 1938. Adelaide Herman continued performing well into her 70s. When she died in 1932 at the age of 79, she'd been performing for half a century. But the greatest tragedy of her death was that it ended the magical reign of the Herman dynasty. Many who saw Compar's Herman perform in Europe deemed him the finest conjurer who ever lived. Those who watched his brother in America made the same claim for Alexander. Others lauded Leon and Felix, and just about everyone agrees that the career and strength of Adelaide paved the way for just about any woman entering magic as a headliner. It's ironic that while the first family of magic is largely gone from memory, their work and legacy can be found on stages all over the world. It can be found in simple sleights and grand theatrical effects. It can be found in second sight and card scaling. It can also be found in something as simple as a child's drawing, and in the very image most of us conjure up when we hear the word magician.
Well, hello again. Do you play a little cards?
Yes, I do.
Bummer. I hate it when they play cards, but that's okay because in what I'm going to show you, not only do we use my deck, I deal, and outside of that, you have nothing to worry about. And Leah, as I deal these cards, when you have the impulse, just tell me to stop.
Stop.
And you stopped on the 9 of hearts. See, it's a lot easier if I see the card too. Well, if I took your 9 of hearts and put it on top of the deck, you would know exactly where it is. See, it's on top of the deck. And if I put it on the bottom of the deck, you'd know. But when I cut the deck, you don't know anymore. The spirits know. Do believe in spirits?
Very much so.
Good, because I hate doing this for agnostics. Spirits, show us Leah's card now. Tell them to go back.
Go back.
Take the card that's come out for you, Catherine. You take the entire deck and look at these prices. It's the 9 of hearts.
Bravo! Excellent. That's great.
The greats of modern magic.
Doug Henning was certainly the man who got it going more than anybody. He revived magic.
There are the traditionalists.
The Pendragons are an absolutely fantastic act in magic.
And then, of course, the master showman.
It's such a fantastic show. I don't know how anyone can ever top it.
And the innovators.
I was exhilarated. I had never seen anything that was so breathtakingly contemporary in magic.
Many magicians are referring to the 1990s as a golden age of magic. And to understand why, it's important to recognize those who have laid the groundwork, those who are responsible for bringing magic to new levels of excellence and new audiences, to recognize the greats of modern magic.
Doug Henning!
It was 1975. The TV show was live. The magician's hand shook. But almost every modern magician admits that from this moment on, Doug Henning changed the face of modern magic.
It was his show on Broadway, the magic show, and then his first NBC television special. And that's what he opened the door for all of us. Doug Henning was certainly the man who got it going more than anybody. He revived magic.
He really and truly is the reason for the Renaissance in magic.
He was born in Winnipeg, Manitoba in 1947, and from an early age he was fascinated by magic. He started with card tricks and amusement, nothing more.
It was a hobby, and it was wonderful because I could fool my friends, and it made me a little bit different than they were. I could say, pick a card, and they'd all be amazed at how I found it. And then as I progressed a little bit further, I found out that there's a level beyond tricks.
In his early 20s, Henning hit the road and wound up in Los Angeles, home to the legendary Magic Castle, the clubhouse of the Academy of Magical Arts, and the unofficial home to some of magic's greats. Here Henning met Dai Vernon, considered the master of close-up magic. Vernon took Henning under his wing and gave him an advantage over other magicians.
He just wasn't, the large illusion performer. He did things in a very, he did things in that small area as well.
Now the illusion begins. I call this an illusion because I never actually tear the paper at all.
His mentors have said that Henning approached classic magic with the intensity of a young med student pursuing his degree.
So Doug was very well educated in magic. He wasn't going to reinvent the wheel when it came to the great mysteries of the past. He was just going to bring it to a new generation.
They are led to believe this by the senses that they've trusted all their lives, by their ears, by their eyes, actually believe that they see separate pieces. But they've been deceived. You see, I haven't actually torn the paper at all. You can't trust your senses. You don't believe me? Well, look.
Soon Henning was doing stand-up magic and astonishing audiences with his manner and his finesse, and something else, his look.
It was this 1970s new look, new version, wonderful magic, and a personality that truly lit up the stage and captivated everyone. That was his charm and his personality, besides being an extraordinary magician.
He broke out of the mold. He dressed in jumpsuits and whatnot and had long hair, which was popular in the day. He was one of the young people of the day.
In 1974, Henning set upon one of the most ambitious projects he would ever attempt, a full Broadway show built entirely around magic. He would eventually appear in 3 such shows. Magic designer Charles Reynolds was with him from the beginning.
Gee, I don't know that I really had any particular impression. You know, this little guy with the teeth and the long hair and the sort of hippie garb, and I heard he was coming to Broadway. And what I didn't take into consideration is what an incredible winner Doug was. I mean, most performers come out on stage and they have to work to win over the audience. Doug only had to walk onto the stage and everybody loved him. And he was a star. He had star quality.
And the magic looks like real magic. And the purpose of this is to get this feeling of wonder, this uplifting, beautiful feeling of, wow, maybe there is real magic.
Doug became a big star as a result of the magic show. The magic show became one of the longest running musicals in Broadway history. And as a result of that, a TV producer named David Susskind came to Doug and wanted to produce a television special. It was going to be done live, which was, even in those days, rather unusual.
For better or worse, certainly to magicians it was for the worse, magic had suffered tremendously in television. It had some success in television, but it had never really gotten started to a great extent. And Doug came in, and suddenly it was youthful, suddenly it was bright, suddenly it was fresh.
Of course, a live show means unpredictability, the danger of which multiplies when one is dealing with tigers.
The tigers got loose during the live television show and were actually wandering the halls of NBC while their keeper was running around saying, "Nice kitty," and trying to get them back into this line of cages that ran into the big cage.
As a result of the NBC specials, a whole new generation of magic fans was born. Surprisingly, magicians seemed to agree on why Henning became so successful.
He put himself in the audience, in a sense. Wow, look at this. And he would gaze with wonder at something.
I think the appeal of Doug Henning was that he was exactly the person he appeared to be, and because of that, his performances were completely sincere.
Deep down in his heart, Doug really believed in magic.
He was this wonder child, you know, when he would finish a trick or he did something, he looked so surprised. Wow, I actually did it.
And when Doug did magic, he was, or seemed, as astonished as the audience did at what he accomplished.
I think my great gift to the art of magic is this sense of wonder, and the secret is that I feel wonder inside of myself for the world.
Henning decided to retire in 1986 to pursue his interest in meditation. His departure shocked many in the magic community and saddened friends.
What happened with Doug was he found another enthusiasm, not entirely unrelated to magic, in transcendental meditation.
Henning made the notion of the magician as a modern-day superstar feasible. He made the public aware of magic, and in doing so, helped pave the way for some of the most astonishing magic acts of modern times. It goes without saying, Las Vegas is the Rome of magic, the Colosseum. It is here that the classic illusions are mastered and performed, in some cases redefined. One such illusion is the legendary metamorphosis, wherein the magician manages to change places with their assistant, who is presumably handcuffed and padlocked in the trunk on which the magician stands. Husband and wife team Charlotte and John Pendragon have not only mastered the metamorphosis, they've redefined it, and all magicians agree the Pendragons can do it faster than anyone else.
The Pendragons are the undisputed modern masters of the metamorphosis. Their transposition is instantaneous. To see the Pendragons do metamorphosis is a thing of beauty.
Beyond the metamorphosis, however, the Pendragons have created a style that permeates all of their illusions.
What they do is they'll take some illusions and really make it unique to themselves that no one else can do physically or magically. It's about their bodies. It's about their strength, not only of performance, but literally the strength that they bring to the performance. And because of that, there's a real sensuality to their act in everything they do, in every movement, in the way they handle even the props as well as themselves.
If the Pendragons are redefining classic illusions, then Bally's Casino is playing host to an act that shatters all molds. Their names are Penn and Teller, called by many the bad boys of magic.
I first met them at a college convention where they were booking shows for colleges, and I think Teller was the first real deep thinker of magic that I'd ever met. Penn, I could, never really, you can't pigeonhole him because he's probably the most intellectual, wacky guy.
And in order to do that, in order to move the magic bullet, we will need a magic wand. This is our magic wand.
In tearing apart such classic illusions as the bullet catch, Penn and Teller have earned their reputations as iconoclasts. They are edgy and contemporary.
I saw Penn and Teller perform in their off-Broadway show in New York, and I was exhilarated. I had never seen anything that was so breathtakingly contemporary in magic. I mean, the most popular acts in magic of that time seemed to reflect the 50s, 60s, and at best, 70s. Penn and Teller knew not only what year it was, they knew what day it was.
Even when headlining in Las Vegas, Penn and Teller advertised their show by saying it's a magic show for people who hate magic shows. They have positioned themselves as the nemesis of magic.
And even that, of course, is not true, because no one who excels at something that well could possibly hate the thing they excel at. The fact of the matter is that Penn and Teller do a superb job, not only of fooling their audience, but they fool magicians all the time. And you have to be at the very top of your form to be able to do that.
I think what might be a surprise to people, or what shouldn't be taken for granted, is what great magicians they are.
Many have credited Penn and Teller with taking magic that extra step. Their laid-back, irreverent style, however, hides something that many magicians do recognize.
These two guys are the hardest working magicians I know. I've never met guys who will take a trick apart, rehash it, think about it, revamp it, spend a lot of money redoing it.
A perfect example of this can be found in their take on this legendary illusion, wherein Penn is to catch a bullet in his teeth.
This is a brand new version of it. It's a totally different method, and they do it with laser sights on these big Magnum revolvers. And the wonderful thing about that, the innovation they have, is that they have a big yellow line that runs down the backdrop, across the stage, and right down onto the floor in the theater. And that yellow line is about so wide like that, like a traffic divider.
They're very hardworking, very articulate magicians. I mean, their magic is really very skillful.
Some would call them the antithesis of Penn and Teller, the masters of traditional magic. If so, this is traditional magic at its most theatrical, operatic best. Siegfried and Roy are not simply one of the most popular magic acts in Las Vegas. They're one of the most popular acts, period. Their magic is grand, glitzy, and unforgettable.
They're great guys, wonderful for magic, and really responsible for the upswing in magic in this town more than anybody.
It's such a fantastic show. I don't know how anyone can ever top it.
The two greatest sources of our success are our employees and our relationship with Siegfried and Roy.
Siegfried Fischbacher and Roy Horn first came to Vegas from Germany in 1969 with their pet cheetah, Chico.
It was their first job here in Vegas at the Tropicana, and they only had one cat in their act, which was a cheetah that they finished. They would perform the substitution trunk, the Houdini metamorphosis.
The glamorous Vegas of today, however, did not then exist for magicians. Some have said that Siegfried and Roy did not just have to climb up the ladder, they had to invent it.
It was like two guys who came to Las Vegas and said, okay, we want to make a Las Vegas act that's glitzy and spectacular, and everything that Las Vegas is, we want our magic act to be. And they did it, with the lions and the tigers and the huge spectacular illusions and vanishing an elephant and yeah, if there's a Las Vegas magic boom, they started it. There's no doubt about it. They laid all the groundwork, and all the guys with all the tigers that followed them would not be there were it not for Siegfried and Roy. There's no question that Siegfried and Roy were the trailblazers who created this wave behind them that have allowed many other talented people to come in and see Las Vegas.
Today, Siegfried and Roy can be found performing twice a night, 5 nights a week at the Mirage Hotel in Las Vegas. It's a massive show with over 77 cast members and 100 technicians and stagehands. This is one of the Vegas tickets, and Siegfried and Roy have to work to make sure that every show, for every audience, is an opening night. As a result of their drawing ability, the Mirage Hotel had this theater designed and built specifically for Siegfried and Roy. Just as a 10-acre mock jungle called the Secret Garden has been built for friends of theirs. In large part, it is the big cats they use in their act that have helped make Siegfried and Roy famous. Roy, who does most of the caring for the animals, is obsessive about their treatment and has an almost symbiotic relationship with them.
What Roy does with animals is incidentally a complete mystery to magicians. I mean, his ability to work with those animals as assistants and as partners in the act is a secret that no one's matched.
How busy.
Good morning. I have this bond with my animals because I'm just like them. I trust my emotions. Now you messed up everything. I trust my instinct. Maybe I have been a tiger before in my life.
But it is more than just animals that draw in close to 1 million people a year. It is showmanship, an innate sense of knowing what will astound audiences.
And even to try and describe some of what they do makes you sound a little like a blithering fool, because there's no way to describe the impossible to a certain extent. It just needs to be seen. It is, in fact, an absolutely remarkable work of art on stage every night.
Siegfried and I are very much different from each other. We are like fire and water, we are the clash of the titans, we have thunder and lightning.
Roy by himself would be too much, and I by myself, maybe not enough. We meet in the middle, that's the magic.
But Siegfried and Roy have to go out every single night, twice a night, and do it again. And it's new and fresh for that audience. Obviously, they get a lot of repeat viewers, but still, it's still got to be new and fresh each time.
Despite the glitz and the spectacle, there is, however, a real dragon lurking here. Siegfried and Roy began in 1969. They have been working non-stop since. At some point, the rigors of the act must catch up with them. It is possible that one of the great acts of modern magic may soon retire.
Oh, man. You know, I haven't a clue. I haven't a clue. We look at them now as being so ageless that we're not having those discussions. You know, God, what if they do retire? I mean, man, how do you replace the irreplaceable? I don't know. I was having a great day until you brought that up. Could have gone a long time without discussing that.
Magic is a volatile art form, creating and expending new talent every single day. Nothing is ever held in stasis. As a result, it would be wrong to suggest that magic's greats exist only in the past. New wonders and new magicians will always be created as long as there are audiences around to appreciate them.
I can do something for you that completely lacks deception.
Eating glass, fire, and cigarettes.
Is not a trick in any way.
Sword swallowing, regurgitation,
is absolutely real and amazing.
Sorcerers.
And is also really vile and disgusting.
This is very weird magic.
Oh, let's take it all the way. What the hell? Why do people want to see this stuff? I'm not sure they do. Yeah. Oh, thank you. Look at that. Look at that, folks. If you are easily upset by unsettling sights, well, like this.
There is a type of magician who would rather shock than dazzle you. He wants to make you laugh at his absurdity or wonder, why would anyone want to do that?
I'm not proud of this at all. What does your son do for a living, Mrs. Mulligan? He's a geek.
Todd Robbins is a specialist in what we're calling weird magic. Robbins breathes fire, swallows swords, and walks in bare feet on broken glass. But his specialty, his raison d'etre, is eating light bulbs.
What I do is sort of almost a rebellion from traditional magic. Magicians look at this and say that what I'm doing is not magic. Now I look at it and say it's the closest thing to real magic you're ever going to see. If you define true magic as the ability to do extraordinary things beyond the capability of the average person, then that's sword swallowing, that's fire eating, that's walking over broken bottles. So basically my act is a magic show without tricks. Tastes like chicken.
Unlike most magicians who follow in the footsteps of Houdini, Blackstone, or Henning, the specialist in this kind of magic finds his roots in the European street fair or North American carnival sideshow.
I'd like to call your attention to 2 or 3 particularly.
These sideshows featured fire eaters, regurgitators, sword swallowers, human pincushions, and people who ate seemingly inedible things. Todd Robbins saw this, and his life changed.
Here is a 12-year-old kid seeing this stuff and being hit with the reality that this was all real.
Wanting to learn the secrets, Robbins entered a small magic store and approached a couple of old carnies.
I said, I'd really like to learn how to do those carnival skills. It turns out one of the guys I was talking to had worked in sideshows. And he went, oh, yeah, so you want to learn how to do the dangerous stuff, kid? Oh, okay, I can teach it. Just don't tell your parents. You cannot really learn how to do this. It's sort of like learning how to swing from a trapeze from a book. You can't do it. You have to learn firsthand because there's a great deal of risk to eating glass, to hammering nails in the nose, to fire eating and walking over broken bottles in the bare feet. There's a strong element of risk. The thing I found engaging about the sideshow material is that it looks like a trick, but it's real. Half of what you see in the sideshow is fake, and half of what you see is real. The irony of it is they never make clear which is which, and what is furtherly ironic is that chances are the half that you think is fake is probably real, and the half that you think is real is probably fake.
Sword swallowing is an ideal example.
It takes a great deal to learn how to do sword swallowing because it's dangerous and difficult. It's dangerous because you're shoving 2 feet of steel down your throat. Duh. And it's difficult because whenever you put a foreign object in your throat, you trigger a gag reflex. The only way to overcome it is by sticking something down your throat every day until the throat relaxes, and then you can put the sword down. And that can take up to a year of daily practice, and it's torture. After you've gone through this, then you have to then work it into an act, and then you have to get the guts to put it on stage in front of people. And after you've gone through this whole ordeal, this odyssey, then and only then you discover that no one really gives a damn about sword swallowing. And I think I know why. Let me just show you. They think it's a trick. They know that there's such things as collapsible swords. I've seen them in movies, I've seen them in cartoons and things like that. And so people think that sword swallowing is a trick. And it doesn't matter what you do. You can take a sword that has no handle in which to fold up into. It's just a bar of steel. You can bang it around, you can show it to people, and yet some people will think it's still a trick. So what you have to do is do whatever you can to show that it's real. So here we go. Never done this sitting down. It's worth a try. Here it goes. There was nothing like the taste of steel in the morning. Oh, look, my fever's gone down. So, and the great thing about it is when people realize that what they've just seen is real, when they dismiss their cynical intellect, and it hits them on a much more profound level than just seeing a card trick. For instance, just what you're going through right now.
Like all sword swallowers, Robbins has been injured, scratching his esophagus. Others have died.
There was a guy who took a dipstick from a car and swallowed it, and it punctured right through into his lungs, and there was internal bleeding. And kids, don't try this at home. Wait till you get to school. And and this guy knew what he was doing, and he still ended up, killing himself doing this.
Although difficult and dangerous, sword swallowing is not the highlight of Robbins' show. That honor goes to the eating of light bulbs.
There's no trick to it, but there is a technique behind it. There's a way of chewing up the glass and swallowing it so it doesn't cut up the mouth and throat. And there's a diet and regimen that I go through each and every day that keeps it moving through my system. Just talking about this makes me hungry. I'm ravished, I'm starved, I'm in the mood for a light snack. The thing I enjoy most is getting someone who's very full of themselves, who insists after the whole thing that it can't be done. You can't eat glass. I will then, if it's convenient, grab the person and say, okay, come on. And we'll go down to the local market. I'll give them money and say, buy a light bulb. Or if we're sitting somewhere and it's, convenient, I'll say, now, is that a real light bulb? Is that glass? Okay, unscrew it. And do it right there for them. And it just like a 2x4 right between their eyes. It's great.
Surprisingly, in the hierarchy of sideshow skills, glass eating isn't considered the preeminent special talent.
It's a little bit stale. I guess we'll try something else.
That ranking goes to the regurgitator. Of the physical stunts still practiced today, it's definitely the weirdest. When John Thompson, now world-renowned as the Great Thompsoni, started out as a 12-year-old fire eater and sword swallower, he worked Chicago's Riverview amusement park in the mid-40s, and he worked with the weirdest of regurgitators, Waldo the human ostrich.
He had a Viennese accent on top of everything else. He would say, "My name is Waldo, it's a human ostrich." And he says, "I've been written up 6 times in the Robert L. Ripley column, and I'd like to show you why they call me the human ostrich." And he would have a pie pan, and he would pass this pie pan out, and he would tell everyone to put, if you put a nickel in, he'd give you a nickel at the end of the show. If you put a quarter in, well, most kids would say, "Let's put a nickel in," and then they'd try and get a quarter back at the end. Well, he would get all the money, and then he would take it and down it, just swallow it all, and he'd say, "Yeah, this is why they call me the human ostrich." And he'd open his mouth, and people would look in there. There was nothing there, Then he'd say, "I'm still hungry," and he would take a couple of bridle rings and he'd clack them together, and he kind of put them in his mouth, and they kind of stick out the sides like they could pop. And now everybody really, there's nothing in his mouth. He really swallowed these things. He says, I'm still hungry. Maybe I will have some fish. And he would bring out a little fish bowl with a goldfish in it, and he'd catch it in the net, and he'd put it in his mouth and let the tail do this, and then go. Now a woman would pass out, you know, watching this, and nobody wanted to look in his mouth. They believed him, you know. And he said, I'm still hungry. Now he said, some filet mignon, and he would take a little white mouse, and he'd put it in his, and let the tail hang, and he'd go. Now men would pass out, you know what I'm saying? And finally, he would finish with a dessert, and he'd bring a bowl of lemons, and people would always select the largest lemon, and he'd swallow that. And he kind of counted on him not looking in his mouth anymore, you know, because you could see the lemon way at the back. He had everything in his esophagus lined up, you know. And then he would literally regurgitate everything. Out would come the lemon, out would come the white rat or mouse into the cage, and then the fish into the bowl and swim around, and then the bridal rings, and finally the money. Nobody took a penny. He was always guaranteed that money.
Let's face it, if I did that, animal rights people would be on my case in a second. So I don't. Instead, I use cockroaches. I use about 2-inch cockroaches. And if you put them in the freezer for about 10 minutes, it slows them down to the point of suspended animation, but it doesn't kill them. And it keeps them still long enough so I can put one on my tongue, throw it back, and swallow it down, hold it in the throat, show that it's not there, and then cough it back up again. I gotta get a real job.
Do you mind if I smoke?
Unusual acts such as Tom Mullica's are not new to magic. In the early 19th century, performers like Chabert, the Fire King, would stroll into a blazing inferno and emerge 10 minutes later unscathed. Such unusual attractions were the mainstay of turn-of-the-century dime museums and sideshows. There was, for instance, the three-headed woman, or similar human oddities such as Count Ivan Orloff, the human window pane, a man with eerily transparent skin, or Major Zamora, the celebrated triple-jointed dwarf. By the 1950s, the mainstream popularity of circuses and sideshows had largely disappeared with the emergence of the new medium of television. But all of these elements, oddball stunts, blood, gore, and human freakishness, eventually resurfaced in a unique style of touring show known as the Ghost Show, which usually sold itself in the most gothic manner, borrowing heavily from the horror films of the 1930s. For the price of one ticket, patrons enjoyed an hour-long ghost show alongside a feature film, usually a horror film. One of the most popular performers in this almost forgotten art was magician Raymond, one of the best and most garish self-promoters in the business. Raymond began as a medicine show stooge and worked his way up to a full evening show, becoming famous for his very weird blend of magic and horror. Raymond's ghost shows would present tricks that had to be patently fake, like decapitating an innocent member of the audience with a buzzsaw, yet he would play it for real.
It was a 6 foot by 4 foot wide, and it had this big steel blade, and to begin with, we had these boys and girls on the stage, volunteers. When the griller come out, they'd all run off stage, but I always grab one of the boys or girls and hold them, and we throw the black bag over their head, and 2 or 3 of us pick him up, the girl or boy, and put him on the table. The assistant would bring out a glass of green smoking liquid, and as I started to drink it, look at the kid out on the stage. Do you know what this is? This is the greatest cockeyed concoction that's ever been concocted. It's a green from the mummy, from the old Egyptian tomb. It's mummy juice. You have a mummy?
Raymond would then transform into a crazed mummy character and with the buzzsaw seemingly cut off the volunteer's head.
And the blood would stream down over a big sheet of paper, which the girl's parents were trying to keep from falling on the stage, but more was to show the blood. And then she'd double the paper up and walk off. And I'd jump off the stage with the head in one hand, the machete in the other.
Raymond would tear through the audience with a severed head, and once the audience was at a fevered pitch, he'd hurry back to the safety of the stage, release a pair of terrifying monsters into the crowd, and then suddenly turn out the lights. In the blackness, the audience would imagine they felt snakes writhing at their feet. Luminescent skeletons would suddenly hover above their heads. No one knew where the monsters were, and the result was absolute pandemonium.
Bedlam broke loose. You couldn't hear yourself trying to talk or scream. It took us trial and error for years. I used to throw a handkerchief to the spotlight man and said, now when I throw the handkerchief, I want the lights to go out. And when you hear the police whistle, bring them back on. We never could hear it. So we ended up using a .38 pistol.
Ghost shows were a cultural phenomenon that came and went in the span of 20 years, from the 30s to the 1950s. Magic and ghostly images have always had a relationship. Magicians in the mid-19th and early 20th centuries often included dark and provocative satanic imagery in their advertising and performances.
Around the turn of the century, it was very popular for stage magicians to have at least one spiritualist piece in the program, usually a spirit cabinet routine or something ghost-oriented. And then by about 1930s, 40s, that kind of faded out.
Subsequently, workaday magicians concentrated on pulling bunny rabbits from hats and were seen mostly at birthday parties or on children's television shows. However, a small faction chose to reject this style of magic, calling themselves bizarrists. Magician and author Eugene Berger believes this has brought mystery back to modern illusion.
The bizarre magicians are trying to make magic powerful again. Bizarre magic began in the 1950s and 60s in England with Tony Shiels, and in Scotland with a man named Charles Cameron. And Cameron put it very well. He said what he felt magic needed at the time was a good Gothic revival.
Remaining a largely unknown underground faction until recently, bizarre magicians are finally starting to emerge in greater numbers. They embrace the Gothic writing of H.P. Lovecraft and adopt mysterious alter egos. Bizarrists, who are often shunned by mainstream magicians, hold their own specialized gatherings, sharing their admittedly unusual stories and effects. The group Trinity performs for very small groups of people, conducting an interactive evening called the Cross Creek Graveyard Seance. The seance is based on the dead buried in a small cemetery in the Cross Creek Graveyard in Pennsylvania. Trinity presents a seance in which spirit guides visit through objects belonging to the dead and buried.
And as I reached into my pocket to pull out my watch, it slipped from my cold fingers onto Margaret's grave. Well, I can guarantee you what they're not going to experience is your typical Hollywood late-night movie type of seance, okay? We are giving them as real an experience as their imaginations and their emotions allow them to experience.
What Trinity wants is for their seance to seem eerily real. For them, the seance is a shared voyage into another world, not just a show.
Would you tell us at what time Michelle's soul was touched?
9:30.
9:30? 9:30? Michelle, would you read what the letter has to say?
Dear brother, I'm writing you to tell you that our mother has died of the pox. She died last night about 9:30.
Michelle, what time did she die?
9:30.
At the same time your soul was touched? Anthony, I believe we made a contact. In our performance, in our entertainment, in our theater, we're not looking for people at the end to stand up and cheer and clap. We're looking for stunned silence, nervous laughter, I guess women sweating and men crying are quite acceptable. So that would be a successful seance.
The bizarrists want to share experiences. Similarly, sword swallowers and glass eaters are sharing something equally unusual, but they all stay clear of the occult, believing that it may be pushing limits too far.
What's too far in today's society? Does bizarre magic go too far? Hard to say. I mean, for some people, sure it is, and for others, it's probably not enough. What worked at the beginning of the century doesn't necessarily work at the end, you know. Things have changed a lot in these 100 years in terms of people's perceptions.
These specialists in weird magic are shocking our sensibilities, provoking us, showing us that so-called realities can be easily twisted and bent. In the end, that is the goal of all magicians.
It makes people wonder, you know, how is it possible? And that's important because when people start to wonder, they start to think. So that's why I do this kind of stuff, so that if people are amazed by any of the things I do, then my job is done and theirs is just beginning.
There's nothing like a good cigar.
Don't you hate it when you get a piece of glass stuck in your teeth? I hate that. It's okay, I'll floss with the filament. Much better. Oh, by the way, in case you're wondering, I'm not going to eat this part. The reason is because I'm flying down south to do some colleges tomorrow. And if I eat this now, it'll still be in my system when I go through the metal detector at the airport. And if you were working security, would you believe my story? No. I can practically hear the snap of the latex gloves as they prepare for the full-body cavity search, so I'm not going to eat the metal part. But the glass, yeah, here it goes. All gone. Go around. Please hold it apart and get it all done. I've got to get a real job. Now. Oh, boy. Yeah, you know, I really shouldn't be doing this, but my doctor said I needed more roughage.
In Niagara Falls, Ontario today, a man prepared to catch a bullet between his teeth.
There is a fine line between magic and disaster, between the illusion of death and death itself. This is the story of those who have crossed that line, a story of tragedies and the illusion that has caused the most death by magic.
It was a very dangerous trick. I definitely used real bullets, live ammunition, and I don't think I ever want to do it again.
Others who tried to...
You're saying to an audience, you all thought about it, but I'm gonna go there. I'm gonna go to that very frail line where life and death meet.
When I looked down that barrel of a gun, 1,000 thoughts went through my mind.
Oh, down he went.
By their very nature, magic's great illusions border on the macabre. Sawing a woman in half, submersion in a coffin, mock drownings, casually chopping off an audience member's head. Such grue is accepted within the tradition of making magic. Large-scale magic is often a flirtation with death, a rehearsal.
You're saying to an audience, you all thought about it, but I'm gonna go there. I'm gonna go to that very frail line where life and death meet.
Bill Bowie, Niagara Regional Police, and you also have a stretcher here for me, don't you? I appreciate it. I hope I don't have to use it.
Ben Robinson is playing with that frail line where life and death meet. This is one of the most dangerous illusions in the world of magic. It's called the bullet catch, and it involves the magician appearing to catch a marked live bullet between his teeth.
1, take your aim! 2, take your aim! Fire!
Oh, down he went. Not moving for a moment, he lost several teeth doing this for the first time, he says, after falling down some cemetery steps at Houdini's tomb.
12 have died doing this very illusion.
Let's see how he did.
Seems all right.
Now for that bullet, let's see it.
Officer Bowie, take a good look at it. Is that the mark you placed on the lead slug? It's my mark.
Over the years, many magicians have lost their lives while flirting with the darker corners of their craft. From escape artists to murdered mentalists to 12 who have lost their lives to the bullet catch illusion, the magic world has stories that range from the terrifying to the freakish to the bizarre. This is the story of those who have come close to losing and those who have lost their lives to magic. His name was Washington Irving Bishop. He was a mentalist magician, a mind reader. In 1889, Bishop was performing his mind-reading act at the Lambs Club in New York for a very prestigious audience. During the performance, he collapsed. Unconscious, he was taken to a room upstairs and examined by doctors who were unaware that Bishop suffered from catalepsy. Catalepsy is a condition that gives the impression that all vital signs have stopped, or as the dictionary puts it, a trance or seizure with unconsciousness of the body. Unaware of this, the doctors pronounced Bishop dead and performed an immediate autopsy, removing his brain for study, presumably wanting to see if there was any physical reason for his mentalist abilities. It was his autopsy that killed Bishop. Magic has largely been an unregulated affair, and no area has less regulation than the area of sideshow performers. It's one of the seldom considered but more dangerous subsects of magic. Todd Robbins is a professional sword swallower, well-versed in the art's dangers.
There was a guy who took a dipstick from a car and swallowed it, and it punctured right through into his lungs, and there was internal bleeding, and kids don't try this at home. There was a sword swallower at the turn of the century who did this beautiful act, and one guy did not believe it was real, ran up on stage and punched him in the stomach while he had the sword down. And that's not a good thing.
In most cases, the reason behind death by magic is poor planning or hubris. James Randi is able to give us a first-hand glimpse of how tricks can go dangerously awry. Randi had been a professional escape artist for 43 years when he took a dare that he could not escape from the Toronto Sun newspaper's security safe. For Randi, the safe appeared to represent a relatively easy escape.
Well, I looked at this, and it was obviously, to me, a fireproof safe used for documents. They emptied it out. I got inside, and they closed the door, and they spun the dial on the outside. Now, I don't give away much of a secret to tell you that I had a small flashlight with me. Stuck it in my mouth, bit down on it, which turned it on, And I had a screwdriver with me. I started to work on the inside plate right opposite the combination dial. Well, as I was working on the screws, I noticed that the plate was pressing out at me. And I pushed on it, and it had a spring behind it. And I knew exactly what that was. That if that spring were let loose and it came out, the two deadlocks, and there were deadlocks that had been built into this door and shouldn't have been, that would spring into the sides of the safe and would seal it for good. That would be it. I would have to be cut out with an acetylene torch, and I'd be dead long before that. So I was running out of air, and so I shifted around slightly inside the safe, and in the process, lost all of the screws down at my feet, but I didn't care by then. And I just spoke in a good loud voice. I could hear everything that was going on outside. And I said, "Open the safe, I've got a problem here." And I felt myself passing out, so I jammed my head up against the plate so that it would not spring out. I had a couple of the screws out, I had a couple of the screws in, and I was trembling so and so weak from deprivation of oxygen that I could barely get the screws turned in. And there was much zipping and back and forth. And the office manager was saying, "It won't open, it won't open." And I'm thinking to myself, I didn't touch the inside. There's nothing wrong with that. It certainly should open. Moses, my assistant outside, was pretty cool. And he figured out what had happened. He simply turned, I could hear him plainly, and I never heard better words out of a man's mouth. He said, "Who opens the safe every morning?" And a young lady said, "I do." And he said, "Please open the safe." She knelt down, I was told, in front of the safe, zip, 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 clunk. And it opened, and as it opened, I felt the air rush in at me, and I fell, and I don't remember hitting the floor. I passed out.
It is a perfect example of how tricks go awry, even for experienced artists like Randy, who has performed everything from an upside-down straitjacket escape over Niagara Falls to remaining submerged underwater in a coffin. But there's one illusion Randy has refused to attempt.
I have never done the bullet catch, never wanted to do the bullet catch.
It has not changed much since its initial appearance in the 1600s. Basically, an audience member marks 1 or 2 bullets, which are then placed in a marksman's gun. The magician then stands before the marksman, who fires. The bullets are caught either on a plate held before the magician or in the magician's teeth. The bullets still bear the marks made by the audience member. It's such a dangerous trick, in fact, that only a handful of magicians today have ever tried it.
It was a very dangerous trick. I definitely used real bullets, live ammunition, and I don't think I ever want to do it again.
When I looked down that barrel of a gun, 1,000 thoughts went through my mind.
I've been shot in the hand, I've lost part of my ear, my 4 front teeth are false, I've been lacerated in the leg, and then you say, well, bright guy, why do you persist?
That indeed becomes the question. Ironically, while this trick has grown to mythic proportions in the magic community, little is known of its origins.
In 1631, in the edition that I read, it talks about a man catching a bullet in his hand.
Historian and magician Ben Robinson has performed the bullet catch trick 6 times and written extensively on the subject, most notably his book 12 Have Died. He is familiar with all those performers who ever died or were injured doing the catch, little-known talents such as Magic Marvo. The tragic tale of Marvo illustrates one of the main problems with the bullet catch: too much audience participation.
He did the catch, he did the trick, but a guy stood up in the audience and said, "Catch this," and took his own gun out and slayed the magician. Very accessible, this trick, because we all know about guns, we all know about bullets, we all know about death. Every night you turn on the TV, you see somebody shot. This trick, this illusion, this stunt, attaches itself to our very primary being, because it's death.
One of the more horrific bullet catch tragedies involved Arnold Buck, a popular magician in the 1840s.
He gets a guy out of the audience, he says, "Load the rifle." They load the rifle. He says, "Now walk over there with the rifle, and you're gonna fire on my command." In that day, the end of the barrel was fluted. It was like a tulip. And when the man walked into the audience, he reached into his pocket and took out a handful of carpenter's nails and dropped them down the barrel. went and took his place. Buck didn't see him do it. The audience doesn't know what he's doing. It's a gaslight theater. It's dramatic effect. They've seen Arnold Buck do this many times before. Okay, we'll get our money's worth. 1, 2, 3, fire. And Buck got nailed, quite literally.
The obvious question in these circumstances is why the audience members behaved with such cavalier disregard.
Because the gun would invite it. And think of it from the audience point of view. It's like, well, hey, he can catch a bullet. I'm just making the show better. You know, he'll catch lots of things. He's gonna do it. Saw him do it last night. Now I'm loading the barrel. New show, big surprise. Because they bought into it. They really believed he could do it.
The tale of John Henry Anderson, a legendary magician of the mid-19th century, is one of the best in the bullet catch's history.
He pulls this guy out of the audience and says, will you help me load the bullet? You know, we're gonna go through this, and then you're gonna fire at my face. And the guy who was helping him was an amateur magician. And as Anderson writes, he foiled my trick. He knew what I was gonna do, and he stopped it. So when he took the rifle, Anderson saw him blow his trick apart. He walked into the audience where they'd fire from the orchestra seats with a live rifle. And he said, take very careful aim at my face. Train right on my lips, sir. You know as well as I do you could kill me. Will you? I will count to 3, and you'll pull the trigger, and my life will be in your hands. And he mentally fenced him. He was like, dude, are you gonna shoot me?
The audience member opted against firing the gun, instead dropping the rifle. Anderson decided to exploit the moment.
You know, he played it up. The man who had the rifle in his hands could have taken my life, knew my trick, and has decided to let your Wizard of the North live. You know, thunderous applause.
Aside from being the most dangerous illusion in magic, the bullet catch was also responsible for one of the most legendary onstage deaths in the history of the art form. Chung-Ling Soo, the mysterious man from the East, had a legendary encounter with the legendary illusion. He was one of the top draws in magic, thrilling audiences throughout the world. He had apprenticed with Herman the Great and the fabulous Harry Keller. His name was Chung-Ling Soo, and he became the most recognizable Asian in show business. But there was one problem. He wasn't Asian. Chung-Ling Soo's real name was William Ellsworth Robinson. He was born in 1861 and spent most of his life in theatrical circles. But after his apprenticeship with the magic greats, he had trouble making a name for himself. Robinson decided to head for Europe.
And he found that he was much more successful as an Asiatic act, apparently an Asiatic act. So he took the name Chung-Ling Soo after Ching-Ling Fu, who was very popular and was an actual Chinese person. He took this appellation, and for a couple of decades, he carried through the illusion with the public that he actually was Chinese. He accentuated this by never speaking directly to the reporters, the press, or to the audience, but always through interpreters. Now, he could speak English as well as anyone else.
To make his show even more spectacular, Soo added an illusion to his act that he had previously performed with Herman the Great, the bullet catch.
So he has a whole squad of guys with sabers and robes and timpani and a huge show, operatic bullet catch.
On March 23, 1918, Chung-Ling Soo was performing in London at the Wood Green Empire Theatre. The show finale was the famous bullet catch, the trick he had been performing for 14 years.
2 bullets loaded into 2 rifles are going to be pointed at him, marked, fire on his command. Actually, it was the stage manager's command, lower a saber, fire, catch the bullets on the plate. The saber is lowered, the guns report, Chung-Ling Soo staggers back, rips open his robe. There is a gusher of blood coming out of his chest. The audience applauds. Thunderous applause. Hey, got shot in the chest. Staggers back, falls to the ground, fire curtain comes down. Pandemonium in the audience. oh my God, wait a minute, it's real. They take his handkerchief, they stop up the wound from the back, they roll him around, they take another guy's handkerchief, they stuff it in there. He's dying, he's shot. He says, "My feet are cold." First signs of death. You're losing your body temperature. They try to rub his feet, try to make him feel better, not happening. They get a stretcher, not like 911 today, get the paramedics immediately. This is waiting for a horse-drawn carriage to come to the theater to get a great star who is lying on stage bleeding to death. He dies the next day, probably just past midnight. Immediately, rumors fly. Murder? Suicide? What was it? Scotland Yard gets into it. They employ a gun specialist named Robert Churchill. They discover the secret to Robinson's bullet catch, which I won't reveal, by cutting the barrel in half. They see a malfunction in the rifle. Robinson had kept the guns sequestered, never let anyone touch them. He cleaned them himself. The verdict was, he said, by being too miserly with his secret, he led to his own death. So it was ruled death by misadventure. That's the official coroner's verdict.
Of course, one of the side effects of Sue's death was that it revealed what had been known to magic's insiders for years, but had been kept a secret from the public, namely that Chung-Ling Soo was not Asian, but a Caucasian.
Yes, there was a certain amount of titillation in the press afterwards when they revealed that he actually was an Englishman, perhaps a little bit of resentment by all those people who have been taken in by it, because his makeup and his mannerisms and such as Chung-Ling Soo, as a Chinese, were really very well done. He put a lot of work into it and had a lot of good advisors to tell him how to go about it, and he fooled them all, except the Chinese.
After Sue's death, the bullet catch trick became so infamous that even the most daring of magicians wouldn't attempt it. An exception was escape artist Harry Houdini, until he received a letter from celebrated conjurer Harry Keller.
Houdini then said, "I will now do the trick that just killed my good friend Rob Robinson." And he didn't do it, because Keller, the magician, famous dean of the Society of American Magicians, said, "Harry, don't do this, you know, you moron. Some guy is gonna, the exact words in the letter was, some dog will job you." Great backstage lingo.
More than 60 years after Chung-Ling Soo died performing the bullet catch, magician Paul Daniels set out to recreate it live on British television. He used Soo's original costumes, and remarkably, one of the two men who fired on Soo was present to fire again.
I was there the night that they taped Paul Daniels doing a recreation, and it was quite an exciting moment. That audience was pretty tense, I must say.
It belongs only in the hands of the professionals. And while time has taught the world that it is not a trick to toy with, a modern-day version shows that it is still a remarkably effective magic illusion. The most innovative variation is done by magic superstars Penn and Teller.
And they do it with laser sights on these big magnum revolvers, and they shoot across a line. And they never cross that line. One's on one side, the one's on the other, and yet the bullets end up on the other side of that line.
Magic is often a flirtation with death, in concept and sometimes in reality. Through Marvo to Chung-Ling Soo to far too many others, we're taught that the dangerous illusions of magic can only be performed with vigilance and strict attention to detail and safety.
The average audience isn't going to believe that you're really going to catch a bullet from a rifle or a pistol in your teeth. Come on, let's use a little bit of common sense here. You can't do that.
Let's watch the final moments.
Take your aim!
Oh, down he went. Not moving for a moment, he lost several teeth doing this for the first time, he says, after falling down some cemetery steps at Houdini's tomb. Ben Robinson says this is the fourth and last time he is performing the illusion. Let's see how he did.
Seems all right.
Now for that bullet. Let's see it.
Officer Bowie, take a good look at it. Is that the mark you placed on the lead slug? Yes, fine mark.